KPIs measure how customers are performing for us. We're talking conversion rate, customer lifetime value, etc. I mean, all these things are measuring how customers are performing for us. But are we really measuring how we're performing to customers? So they actually went and visited people in their homes, sat with them, watched movies with them, ate popcorn with them, and started trying to understand how they feel and how they think. So it's not really survey, it's much more.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's needed, because common sense is very complex. There comes a point when you A/B test and you test again and you test again and you see a certain cap in performance, you need to get out of your comfort zone. And this is where you start relying on instinct to make a jump, to make a leap, to make something different. Risk assessment doesn't mean the idea was data-driven. The idea was driven by your instinct, but then you validated the idea using data.
Right.
And that's where the difference is. It's knowing when to pivot. And data doesn't necessarily tell you that. You could be very successful, but your business is threatened by something that will overhaul it completely.
Hi, Eli.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you here.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming to the show. Welcome to Below the Fold.
With pleasure. I love the studio. I love the setup.
Appreciate it. And this has been a while in the making, right? We've been talking about doing this for a while now.
Hasn't it? Yeah, we philosophized a lot, so many times.
We philosophized.
Hopefully,
we worked together on exciting projects.
Exactly. So...
I mean,
long time due. Happy to do this.
We need this space to philosophize, right? Especially about this topic today.
Oh my God.
About data, AI.
Tell me about it. And it keeps me awake at night every day.
And we landed on a very nice sort of title for this discussion, right? Which is the decision-making spectrum, which hopefully can cover data, AI, right? Decision making. But before we get into that, how about you introduce yourself? Give us a little bit of background.
Sure, yeah. So originally, professionally, I'm a data scientist and a data engineer. I've always had a little bit of an artistic side, so I was a freelance photographer for a bit as well, and a philosopher, as we say, or I like to philosophize about things. So I'm a bit nerdy and a geek like this. So eventually, throughout the years, I moved to kind of a digital marketing transformation role, and now I oversee strategic projects with focus on Martech and data.
Interesting.
And,
And have you done philosophy academically? Have you studied philosophy?
No,
or
I haven't. No, I haven't studied philosophy, but I've always been addicted to philosophy. I've always been in debates about philosophy, discussions about life and everything else. And I think the coming of AI kind of triggered more interest and curiosity towards all this realm. It's just fun to just sit and debate.
There's definitely room to philosophize when it comes to AI.
Absolutely.
I mean, were you good in philosophy at school? Because I feel like this is the class we all failed.
No, I was really good at philosophy in school. I was a big geek.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed all the classes.
Right. That's good for us and good for the viewers.
I guess. We're going to try not to philosophize a lot. I mean, we'll try to keep it practical a bit.
Let's go.
I don't want to sound pretentious and arrogant because I'm not actually.
No, but look, we're here to hear your input. I think it's good to take a step back sometimes. Take a step back away from the numbers and common sense.
I see what you're doing here,
and speak common sense actually, or not. But at the end of the day, it's good to think, I guess, deeply about this technology, these technologies, data, and how they're impacting decision making.
Yeah, there's never been a time where technology and philosophy got so close together. And I think one book I would recommend is Nexus, which is a new book about AI and about the evolution of humanity. I would recommend this a lot because this is exactly the realm that it talks about. Access to information, what it means to humanity, what it means to power and wisdom. So I would recommend the book.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's try to explain the spectrum, decision-making spectrum. Yeah. Do you want to have a go?
Yeah. I'll try to have a go. So, so in my opinion, decision-making, as you said, lives on a spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum is instinct. Instinct are all those ideas that do not have a source. You don't know where the data comes from. So, when I say I completed the project instinctively, it means I have no idea how I did it. I have no idea how I executed it. So it's all this thing that we don't understand yet. And basically, if you want to make a metaphor to about life, I mean, a child or a baby acts by instinct, right? They just cry when they're hungry. They look for food. We don't know why. We don't know what's the reason behind this. Interestingly enough, there's a quote by Jeff Bezos that I'll read that talks about instinct, where he says, "All my best decisions in business and in life have been made with heart and intuition, not analysis. When you can make a decision with analysis, you should do so, but it turns out in life that your most important decisions are always made with instinct, intuition, taste, and heart." And that's a very interesting quote. It's very interesting to know that somebody that business-driven, that data-driven, like Jeff Bezos, relies on intuition.
Yeah, I agree.
And we're going to see this.
Yeah.
So in the middle of the spectrum is common sense. And common sense is really shared knowledge, shared expertise, and shared context. So the idea is that, again, it's twofold, basically. Some people link it to cultural norms. So there's Gamashi, he's a philosopher, and he links it to cultural norms. So the reason why we have common sense is because people teach us about things, about norms, and then we adopt a certain common sense, and it's inherited towards the generations. Other people think it's universal truth. And these are universal truths shared across everybody. So if I tell you I'm enjoying a book, you would know that I'm actually not enjoying holding the book. I'm enjoying reading the book or writing the book.
Yeah.
This is common sense when it comes to universal truths. And I had many discussions about this with and I hope he rests in peace. He died recently. He's a professor.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Dr. Walid Saba.
Okay.
He has a PhD in computer science and he is a Nazi about language. So in his opinion, common sense is based on universal truths. And there's some causality in common sense.
So it's acquired rather than...
Yes, it is acquired, but you don't know from where.
Yeah.
It is acquired, you just don't know from where. You just understand things differently. There's something about universal truth that we all share as human beings, and we interpret things the same way.
Yeah.
And basically, there's, again, some sense of causality. So, for example, as a child, you don't touch the stove because it's hot. Why don't you do that? It's because either you watched somebody burn their hand, or you burned your hand touching the stove.
Yeah.
Or you're associating the glaring red with the feeling of pain or the feeling of unease. So common sense is a step forward more than instinct, where you start incorporating your feelings, where you start incorporating your experiences, and you made some sort of assumptions, and you kind of take decisions based on those assumptions. So it's a bit more calculated than instinct.
Instinct is, before we move on, because I think it's I think there's merit in maybe sharing some examples of what they mean. Would you say instinct is survival instinct, or survival instinct it could be instinct?
Yes, I mean usually instinct is based on survival. Right. The purest form of instinct is based on survival. Today, when a business pivots without any data, so I'm going to give the example of Netflix, right? Pivoted from being a DVD to a streaming platform. It was about survival.
Right.
So Netflix foresee somewhere that some disruptions were going to happen. They looked at the technology and they did something completely different. That's instinctive to survive. Some companies, some businesses have the instinct to survive, others don't.
Right.
And basically it is still up to today. I personally, I mean very modestly so, because personally I would still link instinct to survival. It's just that you can adapt it to your own life or to the businesses you handle or to the customers you handle.
Right.
But I think somewhere it is linked to survival, yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
And common sense is something that we were probably conditioned, as you said, to follow.
Yeah, we're conditioned to follow certain, I mean, again, one school of thought is certain cultural norms, where you follow these cultural norms. Others, just universal truths.
Right.
And you can make assumptions. Usually, common sense is very much linked to causality. So basically, you find the root of a problem and it causes something. It causes a trigger.
Okay.
So, and that's a concept in AI that's called causal AI that tries to bridge the gap towards a common sense. Maybe I think we'll talk about this later.
Okay.
But there's this element of causality,
right,
as well in common sense. Yeah.
Okay. So right now we're at the middle of the spectrum.
We're in the middle of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And then on the edge of the spectrum is, of course, data-driven.
The other edge.
The other edge. Data-driven, which means identifying patterns. I mean, we know data, right? Identifying patterns, analyzing the data. Yeah. And it's one step forward. So as we grow, going back to the metaphor of the child, as we grow, we start understanding things better. And so we start linking that to data. So the idea becomes, I turned on the stove 10 minutes ago, so it must be hot.
Right.
So you're not anymore, relying on something that happened or you burning your hand. You just use the data you have in order to determine a certain reality.
Okay.
And of course, data-driven is linked to AI.
Right.
So we can transition, if you want, to the different types of AI and then see how they map to the spectrum. But basically, that's the spectrum. Overall, you have instinct, common sense, and data.
And I feel like the way the spectrum is laid out, or the way you've laid it out, it feels like it's going from human to less human and more dependent on outside factors.
Yes, you can put it that way. Again, that's not a spectrum that's available in the market.
Right.
They're ideas and concepts, but I felt it was a spectrum.
Okay.
And yes, you can maybe consider that instinct is the more human-centered way of thinking about things, because again, in philosophy, usually you have the rational side and the emotional side, and usually we take most of our decisions based on emotions, just like Jeff Bezos said. Even in the investment world today, you talk about irrational investment. This is why it's very difficult to predict who will buy a certain property, because we do our investments irrationally. There's not really always reason in how we invest in companies, so it's all based on emotion. So yes, instinct could be the emotional part. Data driven is something a bit less, but it's still also emotional, because at the end of the day, you're studying people, you're studying humans, you're generating data about customers.
What would you say is today for you a good example of how data has significantly improved a business decision?
It's everywhere, obviously. Just one example is Spotify. The whole business model of Spotify is based on data, how it recommends smart playlists to you, how it understands what you do. And it merges all these algorithms. We won't discuss the technicalities, but that's one of the examples how how Spotify uses data. Another one is Sephora. They have a brilliant personalization strategy whereby they understand their consumer behaviors and everything is personalized across. So these are good examples of data. You see it every day, obviously.
And to your point on Jeff Bezos' quote, in contrast, right, to a data-informed decision, what would you say perhaps is a case where there's over-reliance on data and has backfired?
Yeah. Well, Boeing 737 MAX. I thought about this actually before. But Boeing 737 MAX, they relied on one sensor that took pilot control and then crashed two planes, right? That's a very flagrant example on bad use of data. Another example is Zillow. Back in the days, now they're doing great, but they relied on an algorithm that was supposed to predict market demand on real estate, and it caused them to lose about $800 million in an overnight. I can think of something else as well. So we said Zillow. Another example is Amazon. In 2014, actually going back to Jeff Bezos, in 2014, they used a recruitment tool that was based on an algorithm they developed in-house that was trained against CVs within the industry. But all these CVs were predominantly male. So what happened is the algorithm had bias against female, and all the CVs that had the word women were actually discarded. And so they recruited more men than females. So there was a bias against women. So that's an example. This is how tricky data is.
Right. So there are nuances, right, when it comes to the use of data. And I wonder what would be then the role of AI, across, both data-driven decisions and maybe also in trying to minimize the risk of over-reliance on data.
Okay, so I'll take a step back just to explain first the different types of AI.
Yeah.
At least how I see them, again, because academically you have so many ways to categorize data. But to me, there's diagnostic AI. Diagnostic AI usually finds the why. So a subset of that is causal AI, which we talked about now, right?
Yeah.
The pros of this is that it allows you to find the root cause of a problem. The cons is that it's very computationally expensive and it requires a lot of accurate and real data. Then you have predictive AI. Predictive AI usually tries to figure out the so what or what will happen in the future, right? You predict things. So it works on patterns, historical data, it maps predictions. The pros of this model is that it can allow you to be very proactive in your decision making. This is where all personalization, figuring out whether customers will churn or not, whether they will buy your product or not. All these things fall within the realm of predictive AI. The cons of predictive AI is that it's based on statistics. So it's not deterministic. It's based on statistics. And again, any event that is beyond the historical data that you have can throw the assumptions off. Right. Obviously, any force majeure, anything big. This happens in the stock world. The US elections, every time, wrong polls, right? I mean, all these things are examples. And then you have prescriptive AI, which tells you what to do in the future. So it prescribes a solution to you. That's great. The pros are automation of decision making. The cons are the fact that it doesn't really, so it does tell you what to do, but it doesn't forecast what will happen. And again, it needs to have very solid data. And then the last one is generative AI, which we know about, which is very much about inspiring us with innovation. So you have content generation, you have content augmentation, data enrichment, like tools like Clay or Jasper AI or ChatGPT, and also being able to automate a lot of what we see and what we do. The pros, as we know, is innovation. The cons is that hallucinates. It's very homogeneous. You need to learn a lot of prompt engineering to be able to do it. Now, putting this on the side, to go back to your question, I had to mention all these. To go back to your question, usually predictive AI is the data-driven part, predictive and prescriptive. It's very much based on, the forecast, the algorithms, etc. Diagnostic AI is very important for data analysis, but this is where it can bridge towards common sense, because that's where the causality element, that's where causal AI sits. Now, is it there or not yet? We don't know. Some people say it's there. Some people say it's not. Some people say it's impossible. Like, again, Dr. Walid Saba says that common sense cannot be learned no matter what you do. Causal AI is not it. Generative AI is not it. Right. And some people say that generative AI is the first step towards reaching instinct. Yeah. So instinctive decision making. And, ChatGPT or OpenAI claims that they will eventually get to AGI, so artificial general intelligence. And this is supposedly something that will be as close as human instinct. So on the spectrum, this is how these different types of AI fall, in decision making.
Right. And speaking of common sense, so why do you say common sense cannot be learned?
Yeah, because again, this is not my opinion. I'm just exposing different views. Some people say it will. Sam Altman probably believes it will, because he believes that he will get to AGI, which is even a more evolved form of common sense. Yeah. But for the philosophers or the doctors that say that it cannot be learned, it's because the ideas are not in the text or in the data. Again, if I give you the example of I'm enjoying the book, I'm enjoying reading the book, this is not something that's in a sentence. It's not something that language can represent. It goes much beyond language. And this is why these are things that usually require ethnographic research, a lot of interviews with customers. There's a whole philosophy that you need to adapt to in order to understand common sense. Yeah. One of the great ideas, actually, that we're mentioning about this is an article that I read on Harvard Business Review as well, which talks about the fact that today, and this is a problem with data-driven approaches, today we're measuring KPIs, everybody knows. But think about it, KPIs don't really measure, KPIs measure how customers are performing for us. So we're talking conversion rate, customer lifetime value, etc. All these things are measuring how customers are performing for us. But are we really measuring how we're performing to customers? So the example in the article, there's a very interesting example that says a grocery store, for example, needs to measure if nothing broke. That should be a measure. And they call this customer performance indicators, not KPIs. Right. And I think this is a very interesting theory. And what I've done is I've tried to augment it in the way we track our campaigns. I'm trying to incorporate it in the way we think about the business, because I think it matters much more. At the end of the day, you're not here to measure how they're performing for you. So, and to bridge it to what I was saying earlier, to get or to be able to determine CPIs is not based on data. Right. Because the decision of wanting to measure if nothing broke is based on common sense. Yeah. You will not find anywhere in the data that customers care about things breaking or not. It's such a no-brainer that it becomes a common sense thing. So to me, and again, this is not in the article, I'm being very modest here, we're just, again, philosophizing. Yeah. But to me, being able to reach a shift from KPIs to CPIs, for example, is where you need common sense. Right. And this is where you need a lot of ethnographic research. You need to meet customers where they're shopping, understand how they're doing things in order to determine how to measure.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a world where we can start to measure CPIs without relying on surveys. Because I feel like today you would need to
it's more
utilize surveys.
ethnographic. It's more ethnographic research, not surveys. So ethnographic research means living with the customer. So basically, you go and you see how customers are transacting.
Right.
For example, and there's a very nice case study that you can find on the IDO website where they filmed a whole process on how they dealt with an account.
Right.
From design thinking to execution, everything is filmed. There are like 40 hours of filming of the agency doing that. So they actually went. So it was about movies and cinemas. They actually went and visited people in their homes, sat with them, watched movies with them, ate popcorn with them. And just started trying to understand how they feel and how they think. So it's not really survey, it's much more.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's needed, because common sense is very complex, right? And surveys, again, I mean, we talk about the United States polls. I mean, surveys, do you really think that we are always in a mindset to really express how we feel on a piece of survey?
You're
We
right.
don't.
No.
Why would we? We're lazy.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So it's about measuring or tracking behaviors.
Exactly.
And basically trying to assign these behaviors to certain I guess brand perceptions or CPI metrics, right?
And I mean, UX researchers, design researchers, they sometimes need to be psychologists, because you need to drag the information out from somebody. As a customer, I wouldn't know what to provide in terms of information. I don't even have the time for it, even if you pay me.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't think beyond what's there, what's very basic.
Yeah.
And so it's very important when somebody does the research or the design thinking part, that they understand the depth of a human behavior in order to extract the information needed. It's not easy. I don't think. I mean, nobody does it perfectly, so I'm not claiming.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard to make one that's applicable across brands, categories. It needs to be super tailored, super personalized for every brand, every business.
Exactly. This is
every
why
funnel or.
This is why now, I mean, things are very much. I mean, recruitment is very much based on skills, not just where you got to at university. You need industry expertise. Even to train AI, you need domain. We call it domain expertise, because I mean, at the end of the day, every industry is so different, and with the amount of data that you have now, we need to be experts in these fields as well. So it gets very complex very quickly.
And speaking of instinct, right? What would you say then is what would be a use case where instinct was beneficial, I guess, to a business decision? You mentioned the code for Jeff Bezos. And how would it be different, I guess, from common sense, right?
Yeah. Okay. To answer this question, I'm going to give you a case study that covers all three.
Okay.
Because it's in the nuances. And again, this is another book that I read recently, actually, called Personalized on HBR. Very interesting as well. So the company was called, I think, Songevity. So imagine this: you're a customer, and one day you receive mail, physical mail, not an email, a physical mail with a QR code, with a personalized URL, telling you to check how your house would look like with solar panels. So you click on the URL, or you take a picture of the QR code, and what you see is an actual Google map of your house with a simulation of solar panels on top, the details of the size and the dimension and how much energy you would save and how much it would cost, with a button to call customer service, video call. And then let's say, okay, obviously you will be convinced to buy into the product, and then every solar panel is linked to an IoT, which tells you at some point, a squirrel ate your solar panel. So, you get an alert and you can book an appointment very quickly for fixes. Okay. In this example, it goes through the spectrum, because anything related to figuring out your house, figuring out the dimension of your roof, figuring out the solar panels, figuring out who you are, calling your name, is data partnerships with Google. And I think in this example, it was again Zillow. Yeah. I like how we're mentioning the same things. That's interesting. Good, because that's a positive example about Zillow. So this is very much data driven. Okay, it's a personalization, knowing your customer, right?
Okay.
Common sense is the physical mail. I don't think any data in the world today tells you that customers prefer to receive physical mail rather than email.
Right.
That's common sense. There's no data. This is based on patterns. It's very much common sense. How did they know, or what gave them the absolute certainty that people would love receiving physical mail? You cannot really prove it, right? It's common sense. Yeah. I mean, yes, I would feel special to receive something printed.
Right.
But there's not real data behind it.
Yeah.
Gen Z love this, by the way, apparently. In the
If
latest.
anything, maybe the data says otherwise.
Yeah,
right?
the data could tell you otherwise because there's so much data that you drown in noise and you kind of, oversample or whatever, undersample or all these things. So that's common sense. Instinct is knowing that if you see your house with solar panels on top on a Google map, you're going to buy into the product. That's a lot of investment they did. Imagine the risk they took. Imagine the leap they took to do this. It took a lot of effort. It took a lot of courage. They could have lost business. They could have gone bankrupt. And that's instinct. And instinct allows you to make innovation leaps when the data is not enough. And I'm happy to go into details, but basically there comes a point when you A/B test and you test again and you test again and you see a certain cap in performance, you need to get out of your comfort zone. And this is where you start relying on instinct to make a jump, to make a leap, to make something different.
So when these guys sat in the room and they discussed the idea of using Google Maps to cover your house in solar panels, obviously there was an instinct driven decision to follow this approach, right? Yes. But don't you think they may have discussed or tried to find any form of data as to why this could be successful or unsuccessful? Obviously there's a risk associated, right? I guess when you take an instinct, but are you able to take calculated risks?
Yes.
Maybe perhaps run a focus group, try to ask people, would you be down to finding your house under solar panels? Or
it's a very interesting question. This is where risk assessment comes in, as you said.
Yeah.
But risk assessment doesn't mean the idea was data driven. The idea was driven by your instinct, but then you validated the idea using data. Right. And that's where the difference is.
Yeah. It came first.
Exactly. Yeah. So what came first? Is it the instinct or the data? So basically you started with your instinct and then you validated it with data.
Right.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? So this is why there's something called risk assessment, right? If today I'm going to pivot my company from DVD to streaming, why is it a good thing? Why is it a bad thing? This is where you do risk assessment. This is where you go and ask customers. This is where you can do all surveys. But the idea did not originate from data.
Yeah.
It originated from a gut feeling.
Okay. I think this was a good, I guess, clarification.
It was a good question.
on
it was a tricky question.
on trying to understand instinct, trying to define instinct. Yeah. It's a sort of a chicken and egg analogy, right?
I thought about this as well. Yeah, it is a chicken and the egg analogy.
Yeah. So instinct come first, right? Before you start introducing, I guess, data and assessment on all that.
Data can start first if you want to.
Yeah.
In many cases, it starts first. Again, I see it as a process. So let's talk Martech, since I think we were supposed to be one of the items on our agenda. So in Martech, you release a campaign and then you A/B test it, right? You test it and you test it and you test it. At some point, when you reach a cap in performance, you need to exit. You need to step out of your comfort zone and jump to somewhere else. This is where you start using instinct. And today, creative people shouldn't be complacent to the data. Data will allow you to get a lot of insights, to validate your idea, to test, obviously, to A/B test, to study performance, to change as many parameters as you want and to get inspired. But at some point, a leader should take a call of completely exiting this comfort zone and coming up with something completely crazy. And it's like a cycle. So you have performance is peaking, and then once performance reaches a cap, you introduce an idea to challenge the data. And actually, another element that's very interesting is instinct actually challenges both data and common sense. That's the whole point of instinct. And this is where the concept of disruptive innovation comes into play, right? Mm-hmm. Disruptive innovation, or actually even a better term to this, is breakthrough innovation. Another book that's called The Innovation. It's okay, I won't refer more books. But basically, breakthrough innovation, this is the meaning of a breakthrough innovation. It's an innovation that challenges common sense and challenges the data. Right. And this is where you make big leaps. But it's very risky. This is why you don't do this every day. You actually do it when the data is starting to feel odd to you.
Yeah.
Or again, when you have gut.
Yeah.
Another simple example is, let's not kid ourselves, right? I don't think anybody is over dramatic when you fill employee surveys, right? We don't usually use the one option, like you're unhappy with everything. Nobody does it.
Yeah.
You go 4 or 5 or 3 if you want to really be tough. That's it. But there's gut. Leaders today can have a gut feeling that their employees aren't happy.
True.
That's again instinct. Even if they have the best surveys in the world, even if you're reported like the best company and employees are very happy with you, at some point there's a certain decision that instinctive leaders do that doesn't go by the data. They just feel that something is odd.
Right.
So these are all examples of instincts. It's there, but how much you rely on it is tricky.
So no one's saying that you shouldn't use common sense or data, because sometimes you could create growth with data and common sense, but I suppose you perhaps need to be leaning in on instinct when maybe you find yourself plateauing, when you are using common sense and data, yet you're not really finding the growth you're looking after. This is where you need to start thinking about how can you use your instinct, right? To try different things, try to change it up.
That's true, but it makes me think of something. So companies that went bankrupt because of the whole digital revolution and whatever, they weren't necessarily going bad or underperforming. Something else disrupted, right? Other companies disrupted them. That's one example. Another example is they did not want to self-cannibalize. So if you take the example of Kodak, that Kodak created the first digital camera. It wasn't Apple, it wasn't Samsung, it was Kodak actually created the first digital camera. But they didn't want to cannibalize their business because they were into printing photos and etc. So they actually parked the project. And all of a sudden, digital cameras were introduced and they went bankrupt. Before then, they were doing great. So if you look at the data, again, this is why instinct is kind of tricky. If you look at the data, they were doing great. They were selling, Kodak. It was just amazing. Their business was booming. All of a sudden, something disruptive came. So instinct is about trying also to understand what's disruptive out there and feeling it. And seeing it come before it comes, which is kind of very complicated. Because the same happened with Blockbuster and Netflix, right? Blockbuster was doing great. They were spending tons on advertising. They even, at some point, they mocked Netflix about personalization or something like that, that you need the customer support. We have live customer support 24/7, not a stupid streaming website that does. And then suddenly they went bankrupt. So the whole idea of instinct, it's not easy. I don't have the answer. Otherwise, I would have owned such a company. But it's knowing when to pivot. And data doesn't necessarily tell you that. You could be very successful, but your business is threatened by something that will overhaul it completely.
Another example, perhaps, is also the BlackBerry and Apple saga, right?
Absolutely. That's another example.
BlackBerry is the first one, I guess, that was allowing users to transmit messages via the internet on your phone, right? But Apple had the instinct to introduce touchscreens.
Crazy technology that changed our life.
Right,
That changed the user interface as we know it. So
that's instinct right there.
Exactly. And funnily enough, for Apple specifically, the way they work, there are companies that are customer obsessed like Amazon. There are companies that are more product obsessed. Apple falls under product obsession, not customer obsession. Apple doesn't wait for data from customers. They try to predict what customers will actually need when they introduce it.
Right.
Versus a company like Amazon. Amazon is very data driven, weirdly enough, even though he says that he's instinct, but it's very customer obsessed. Apple is not. Apple creates the need and sells the need.
Right.
And I think somewhere this is where instinct falls under as well.
Right. I'm just trying to be conscious of time.
Yeah.
And I think we still have a really good couple of sections to cover, which are good content.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about Martech? Maybe.
Yeah.
We talk about the implications. For we jump to that for Martech.
Yes, we can. So of course.
And I have a type of format to talk about Martech here, which is quick fire.
Yeah, let's go.
Questions. Are you down?
Let's go. Down.
Okay. They're a little bit broad, but do what you can. All right. Okay. Best AI tool for Martech today.
I would quickly say ChatGPT, even though it's very expensive. But no, if I want to think of, I will think of a tool type, which is the CDP, which everybody knows about. CDP is AI, and CDP links data from everywhere and allows you to personalize and segment audiences. There's a very good tool that I love, which is called OfferFit for A/B testing. It actually allows you to run tens of thousands of A/B tests in a day, and basically imagine the number of data you can have. But again, there are 14,000 Martech tools in the market today. Each one of them has an AI component. So I don't know all of them, but
right. Another one is data or creativity. Which should marketeers prioritize? And I feel like we should probably say instinct, not creativity.
Yeah, it's the same, maybe. Yeah, instinct or data.
Yeah.
Both equally.
It's
but
about finding the right
marketeers,
balance.
maybe marketeers per se, I would say more data.
Yeah.
I mean, rely more on data, but know when there's a limit to data and when you need to, again, as we were saying, get out of your comfort zone and think of something new.
Right.
As long as you have this in mind, you can do it. I think people tend to forget when they deal with data every day, they don't have the instinct to take a step back and think of something that is not necessarily data driven. Think about the human at the end of the day that you're serving and what could shake somebody, a customer or whatever. It's just about putting this in mind and really looking at it as this chart that says, reaching cap performance, exiting comfort zone.
One major AI challenge in marketing.
Humans. I think it's mainly people, to be honest. I think it's change management. I think it's risk taking and daring to take the risk when it comes to AI. Another thing I would say is the infrastructure that most companies have. There's a lot of silo in data, and any AI tool requires a very solid engineered system. At least that's what we're seeing in the market. That's why foundation is very important. Hence why I told you CDP earlier.
Okay. And do you think maybe education is one of them? Even though they're becoming more and more user-friendly now.
There's always education, but I think if I want to give, and I think this is really important, sorry if I'm cannibalizing something.
No, not at all.
What's really important is that, we tend to sell as marketeers as well, and as digital people, we tend to sell the dream, which is the customer data, the golden customer record, etc. And that's not a good approach, in my opinion, because again, you need to start small. It's very scary for companies to completely overhaul their systems and move to a new system. So the idea is to go use case by use case. You create a use case, you stitch a little bit of data, you test. And then you create another use case, the MVP model, minimum viable product. Even in marketing and AI, it works. The whole idea is to find a use case that can prove performance and then roll out to something bigger. Because otherwise, it is really a big investment. And people need to start slowly and then test and then see how it goes, because it brings a lot of transformation in how the business is done and how even the teams are structured around a certain project.
Yeah, and I feel like based on our discussion on instinct first, or the instinct, I guess, portion of the decision-making spectrum, with the use of AI today, it almost feels like people are becoming more reliant on data and what the AI, brings and says and, presents to the end user, rather than following their instincts.
People are becoming more reliant on data, yes. But again, there's a spectrum. There are leaders who are only instinctive. Those are not necessarily good at all. And there are leaders who are more data-driven. You just need to find the balance between both.
Speaking of leadership, right, and leadership in a data-driven world, what would you say is a scenario where what would make a good leader to lead in leading a team with only data-based strategies?
Only data-based?
Yeah.
Leading a data team only.
Yeah.
I don't think that could be a leader that leads the business side of things.
Right.
I don't think that's enough at all. I mean, if you're leading a data team, then yes, so be it. Even not though. I think you always need instinct in your business.
Right.
As a leader.
So someone who's leading a team with only data-based strategies needs to start looking into
instinct. Yeah. Leading is becoming very difficult. We're leading change. Leading change.
Right.
Every leader is leading change. You need to adapt to change. And even if you're in the most technical of roles, you need to adapt to change. So instinct is important.
Right.
It will always be.
I want us to go over some statements. Okay. I'll read these statements and I want us to scrutinize them.
Let's go.
Okay. All right. First one.
Yeah.
This is by Mark Ritson, who is a marketing professor and columnist. Right? He argues that the industry's obsession with data analytics has diminished the role of creative intuition, or perhaps instinct, resulting in less innovative and more formulaic marketing strategies. So he says the overemphasis on data-driven marketing is stifling creativity and leading to a homogenized campaigns.
I agree to a certain extent. I think it's not the industry itself that's doing this. It's the way people are approaching the industry. And again, as I was saying, if you have so you look at how a painter does the work, right? The painter paints the details and then takes a step back and then looks at the painting and then goes back and paints another piece, right? You just need to be able, as a leader, to step back and look at the bigger picture. But these are tools that are supposed to help. I mean, IDEO mentions it as well, as a reference to IDEO again. But I mean, the design thinking process with generative AI became much more efficient because all the work that you do to come up with these crazy ideas before you refine them can be done through AI. The whole idea is how you adapt an idea, how you contextualize it, and taking the necessary step back to create something different. So I think it's an amazing tool to have. It's just the way we implement these tools, the way we use them, that makes the difference. But I think actually at the opposite. I think it's helping creativity.
Okay. Next one. Yep. This is from Tom Goodwin. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Tom.
Yeah.
So Tom says, reliance on big data without proper context can lead to misguided marketing decisions. Right? So I guess when he says without proper context, does he mean common sense? Or
could mean common sense.
Or instinct to analyze the data, to look at the data with some level of curiosity around the context.
Yeah, that's a very interesting quote. Context can mean common sense. It can mean cultural norms. It can mean instinct as well. It can mean understanding. And I think we've already talked about this. I mean, again, you don't know what goes in the mind of a customer every second.
Yeah.
And over-relying on general data, even real-time data, is not enough, right? There are tons of things that we do and we think of every day. So definitely agree with the statement,
Dr. Karen Nelson-Field, she's a media science professor, highlights that while personalization can enhance relevance, it can also exploit consumer vulnerabilities, raising ethical concerns about manipulation and autonomy. So she says, her statement is, data-driven personalization in marketing often crosses ethical boundaries, manipulating consumer behavior without consent. That's a little bit of a spicy one.
Yeah, it is a spicy one. It's totally true, though. I mean, data is a weapon, right? Yeah. And again, I refer back to Nexus. I like doing these cyclic things. Going back to previous.
It's good. It's conditioning.
Exactly. No, going back to Nexus, the book that I recommended earlier, it talks about the fact that the more you have access to data, the more you have power and the more you can misuse the power you have, right? Why? And the book explains why, again, from a philosophical, psychological standpoint, is because the only way to get power is to work through communities. And these communities, they foster corruption, they foster bad ways to use data, and so the same occurs with personalization, of course. But this is why governance is very important. I mean, this is why you have GDPR and you have the new AI law in Europe, because at the end of the day, you're getting to know a lot about consumers. But funnily enough, consumers want personalization. They want you to know more about them. We get angry if we see something that's not relevant to us anymore. Where it gets even riskier, by the way, if I shift the topic, is in crowd manipulation and basically bias. What happens with personalization is you start seeing things you only believe in and you only want, right? And that is a very narrow view of the world. The world is about us being exposed to diversity and diverse ideas. Right now, you go to your news feed, it really follows your thought. So even if you're curious about something else, you don't see it on your news feeds. Everything is so catered towards what you think. And this is, I'm not sure if this is a direct, consequence, but I mean, this is why there's polarity in the world. This is why there's very few moderation. There's either extreme right or extreme left because of this excess of personalization. You need to expose people to other ideas.
Right.
So that's how you can, that can be, that can be done on purpose. So that's weaponized data. But it's also, it can just be the algorithms that just personalize everything to you. And that's really very risky, actually, because you cannot exit whatever your frame of mind is in and actually try to understand the other people. And I think that's a big problem today in our society and in any political, we see it, right? In governance. So
sometimes you
risky.
need something that's not personalized, right? To have more better context or a different POV.
We call this confirmation bias in again the term. And again, showing you things that you only believe in is very narrow. That's not how we learn about the world, and that's not how you learn about, accepting other people's opinions, debating with other people. Probably this is why there's cancel culture from both sides of the spectrum. It's all about, just cornering somebody into their own thoughts without exposing them to other thoughts. And I think that's really bad.
Right.
And that's probably one of the consequences of over-personalization.
And there's debate happening about or around the algorithms of Meta versus the algorithm of X versus the algorithm of TikTok. And the discussion that's happening is
very risky territory here. Yeah,
very risky territory.
I'm scared. What's happening? What are we talking about?
It's all right. This is our field.
I'm kidding.
The recurring thought is that TikTok is less, I guess, personalized. It's a little bit more random than the rest. What would you say?
I don't think so. I think they're just very smart at it. That's personal opinion, but again. I think they're very smart at it. I think they found a way to make personalization very implicit.
Yeah.
But it's still personalized, I think.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion. Again, I could be wrong. Yeah, this is all opinionated, and we just
it drives more engagement, I suppose, but it's not necessarily the best ethical, perhaps, or way to inform a user, right? Give them all the information they need.
Compared to other platforms, TikTok is not politicized.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is personalized, but it's not yet politicized, right?
Yeah.
Other platforms are politicized. This is why we talk about weaponization of data.
Yeah.
So,
okay,
that is something that we can say at least about TikTok.
Right. Fair enough. We have one more from Roger McNamee.
Okay.
I hope I didn't butcher his name. So Roger is a venture capitalist and early Facebook investor. And he criticizes the pervasive data collection practices in marketing and argues that they contribute to a surveillance economy detrimental to consumer trust and democracy. And he says, the pursuit of data at all costs has led to a surveillance economy that undermines consumer trust. I sort of agree with him a little bit. And I also agree that with you that, things like privacy policies and, GDPR and all that are good, to have in place. But I feel like they only scratch the surface, right? When it comes to how much, these big brands, these big companies, are capable of doing with data.
There are... Again, I think there are two different opposing thoughts, and unfortunately, we're living in a world that's very polar.
Yeah.
There's a thought that says that yes, the overuse of data is actually creating a surveillance economy.
Right.
And people blame other people for extra regulation, extra control, wanting to have extra control. This was a narrative in the latest US elections. We can say it very clearly, right?
Yeah.
And these are people who sometimes tend to go to conspiracy theories as well about the surveillance economy. I'm not saying if it's conspiracy or not. I'm not giving my opinion, but I'm just saying that there's this school of thought.
Right.
The other school of thought is that the more data you have, the better. The more data you have, the more scientific evidence you have. The more data you have, the more you can counter people who are extremists, etc.
Yeah.
So these are, again, two opposing schools of thoughts that make this discourse. And I think it's a very interesting discourse. Some people go as far as saying and I think we talked about this a few minutes earlier,
Yeah.
go as far as saying that technology and AI will eventually kill capitalism.
Yeah.
Sam Altman said that AGI might kill capitalism. That's a huge topic of discussion that we can talk about at a later stage. But basically, there is this risk that, I mean, technology is becoming so disruptive that it's changing human behavior. And then it could cause a whole disruption in our policies and the way we do politics and the way we do economy. And I think we might be seeing it. I mean, again, I'm not that important of a person to analyze society at large, but at least you kind of feel that we're living in a hybrid space.
Mm-hmm.
This whole polarity, these things that are changing, the markets that are unstable, something is happening. And I think it's the mere presence of these technology tools and how we became so reliant on the tools as human beings that is creating a certain shift. We'll see to what. It could be an evolved form of capitalism. It could be the fall of capitalism. It could be other forms of socialism, advanced, maybe more moderate forms of socialism. We never know.
Mm-hmm.
But you're seeing these seismic changes. And it goes back to this discourse again. It goes back to personalization. It goes back to how people are viewing and seeing content. But even more when it comes to AI.
Yeah.
We are changing our behavior. Generative AI, and there are many studies there, generative AI is changing the way, slowly, will change the way our brains are wired.
Right.
The way we rely on things. It's so disruptive that we're changing the way we think about things. I love it. I think it's just great. Everybody should use it, by the way. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm always trying to expose it's a good
both,
point. But remember, I guess a few minutes earlier, we touched on how also generative AI may also be reducing our the frequency to how much we use instinct, right, in our decision making. So
yes,
it is something that we need to be mindful of. Right.
I totally agree.
So a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago, our instinct became to start using Google or Google everything. Right. Now we're ChatGPTing everything.
Yeah.
So we are kind of moving away from instinct.
I hope not. I think you can do both.
Right.
I think you can have the best tool in the world that is, that helps you come up with ideas, that helps you create, that gives you innovative territories, that helps you generate a video in 10 minutes. And we will see Sora soon, maybe. Apparently, they will announce it soon. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Today they announced the 401, but anyway.
Right.
Which is like $200 a month. I'm straying away.
Oh, wow.
Sorry. Yeah, but it's huge. It's like it's worth it when you're doing very expensive apps and developing apps. Anyway.
Yeah.
So to go back to what I was saying, I think it's great to have this tool. I think it's about the use of the tool. At the end of the day, we're humans using tools.
Yeah.
Right? Until AGI, until maybe the tools will use us, so far we still have the leverage and the freedom to orient our mindset.
Yeah, but I think it's very helpful to kind of use this framework, right, that you're proposing. And whether we're following, we're trying to make a business decision, or when we're using generative AI, right, to use this spectrum, right, as a framework when we make that decision, right, to look at, what would be an instinct, first decision, what would be a common sense first decision, and what would be then, the data driven decision. And I think that would be helpful it's a helpful way to sort of deal, with AI or any decision for that matter.
We need to just, we need to keep critical thinking going on with whatever tool we use.
Yeah.
And as long as you commit yourself to follow a certain mindset, then great. But again, the problem is that you're talking about society at large. We're talking about marketeers here, right? But when you're talking about life and economy, you're talking about society at large. Sometimes difficult to tell everybody to watch out and use their critical thinking. So this is where it gets a bit complicated, right? So you never know. We actually might be more responsible, the people behind personalization, than the marketeers and creative people, more than other types of people, because at least we're exposed to this kind of knowledge.
Right. So let's end this episode by maybe trying to define a practical takeaway for listeners, right? Yeah. What's one actionable step businesses or individuals can take to better balance data, instinct, in common sense? in their decisions.
I will repeat something because we already talked about it.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes to the business, something very practical is don't go crazy. There's no need to go create the crazy golden record and etc. Start with use cases, test the use cases, see how they perform. Keep testing. When you notice that they reached a certain cap, you can shift and risk. And then come up with something crazy that doesn't respond to any data. You validate the data with people. We talked about CPIs. We talked about ethnographic research, and then you implement something. I think that's the most concrete thing that I would personally advise. And at least I try to follow this as much as possible.
Yeah. Thanks, Ilya.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, same here.
I enjoyed this.
Me too.
Thanks.
Thanks.
See ya.
See ya. Bye.